Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank, 1 minute at a time. I'm Dev.
And I'm Hugh, and on today's show, we're going to be looking at minute 61. Grocer and Blank at breakfast in the diner. Grocer looking at Blank and saying, "No wonder you got the shakes."
And joining us on today's show, we have the wonderful Dr. Rayna Denison. Welcome, Rayna.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Dev. Thank you, Hugh, for having me. This is so exciting. I love this movie so much.
Hey!
So, speaking of that, how did you first discover the movie?
So I watched it when it first came out. I'm old enough to have done that. But it hit at a perfect moment for me just because I was super into Hong Kong action films and into Japanese action films. And so was looking for other things that had a similar feel and a similar vibe. So this Grosse Pointe Blank is perfect for that. It's a movie where everybody seems to be really engaged with doing the stunts and being involved in the action, and at the same time it's funny and it's witty and it's just a perfect action movie in so many ways. And I didn't know all that I have subsequently found out about it in terms of it being independent, and although taking some money from Disney, but it's just great in terms of how it is pushing back against the kind of norms of Hollywood filmmaking at the time. So I love this movie on so many different levels.
I think, I mean, a lot of what we've said in past episodes is this is a movie that would never get made today.
Exactly that. Yeah,
But
yeah.
the thing that really fascinated me about what you just said is the concept of likening this to Hong Kong or Japanese action movies, because
hmm
I'd not made that comparison before, but I totally see it. It's got that blend of comedy and action that you didn't really get
Mhm.
much in
Yeah,
Western.
yeah.
If Western versions always had a lot more gunplay, shooty, actiony explosions rather than
Yep.
close quarters fighting. Although this still, I guess, doesn't really have as much of the combat as you'd normally see in the kind of Hong Kong
Yeah.
genres. But yeah,
But it
it's
definitely has that. I
Mhm.
mean, you and I were saying when we did the scene in the Ultimate. You know, the whole two-gun stance thing
Yeah.
is pure John Woo. You know, the
yeah.
fact that
Pure John Woo.
yeah, Benny the Jet is firing twin Mac 10s together, which is again very Hong Kong. I mean, yes, it's the ultimate. You know, as we said on those episodes, it is very much an American. The American
hmm
shootout in the grocery store thing is an 80s standard. You know, and
hmm
so there's that, but then they bring that Hong Kong element to it. And I think, and I think it's that little wonderful blend of here's our little bit of Hong Kong, here's our little bit of America, and then it ends in a very American way. You know,
Yes.
with
Yeah.
the way the explosion is, you know, I can't. Which review was it? Oh God, years ago, I think it was Rolling Stone magazine that did a review of the Hollywood remake of Nikita with Bridget Fonda, and they said there's a complete lack of subtlety in this version. They said in the French version, you know, she takes a device up to a hotel room which we assume is going to detonate, but we never see it. In this film version, we have to stop, pause, could be outside, see the room explode. Yay for Hollywood. But that's that thing, isn't it? It's that big graphic. We can really blow it up. We can actually afford to blow this stuff up. That's so American. And like, you know, the Hong Kong, yeah, Hong Kong movies were getting very, very good at that as well. But yes, there's something about it. There's just something about Grosse Pointe Blank that it everyone I know who loves it has either come to it without knowing Hong Kong film, but has then gone on to watch other films.
hmm
Or like you and I, Rayna, they've come to it because we were into Hong Kong film. We watched this and we're just like, whoa, these guys have done their homework, you know?
And this is such a perfect moment for this film to be made as well. You've got
Yes.
the rise of the mini majors like Miramax and others
Yeah.
in this time period, which are doing this kind of production, creating, like, taking big money from big Hollywood conglomerates and siphoning it into kind of mid-level 30-40 million dollar films, 20, usually 20 to 40 million dollar production value, production budgets, and then giving those films amplification through distribution.
Hmm.
And that's how I think we get these really exciting movies from Pulp Fiction right through to this one
Mm.
in this period that you wouldn't have had before or since.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you just wouldn't get this kind of movie. Well, you might, but it would be attached to
No.
an adaptation or a franchise or something like that. And I think this
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
you know, it's such an exciting film to see. And we were just talking about the brother's son last week, Hugh,
Oh yes, we were. Yeah.
and I think that there's a vibe in which now maybe we're seeing some of that happening via television rather than via
Yeah.
film. So
Yeah.
it's a great moment to look back at this film and sorry, that was the kitten. It's a great moment to look back at this film and see what Grosse Pointe Blank was bringing. And it's a moment where television is taking its cues from film as well. This is so close to the production of The Sopranos,
Mm-hmm.
and that
97. Yeah.
yeah, it's such a great moment. I love all that this film is encapsulating for the market and also for independent filmmaking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, 97 is such an interesting time for film looking back on it now. We knew it at the time that it was amazing and great, but actually in hindsight, its importance and its significance has just and the pleasures of the films themselves has just
Yes.
only grown.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the year that both John Woo and Chow Yun-fat debut separately in America with Hard Target and Replacement Killers. Pulp Fiction has already is it 95?
Yeah.
Pulp Fiction wins the
94, 95? Yeah.
95. It wins the can. It wins Cannes, and we're 2 years after that. So we've now had Usual Suspects, Things to Do, Never Really Dead. We've had the whole American indie crime scene blow up. The neo noir thing is in full swing.
Yeah.
So films like this, because in previous episodes we've talked about certain aspects of Grosse Pointe Blank are deliberately styled in a noir lighting setup, and there's a visual cue there with his LA office that makes it look,
Yes. Yeah.
the whole thing that makes it look like Mike Hammer and Joan Cusack as Velma, and then you get to the bright daylight of Michigan. But I think the other thing about this that we found interesting is when we were investigating the film. So this scene that we're looking at in today's minute is it's set in a diner. It's set in the high street diner. We have our two hitmen who initially clashed, even though they know each other at the beginning of the film, and then later on outside LA where they could, out on the hill, very Michael Mann style.
Yes.
We're out here looking there. Oh God, that's the point. He came out around this time as well, didn't it? Oh my word! What a year! I think I must have.
Isn't it amazing?
Oh my God! I thought 99 was good, but 97 is just wow. But we've one of the things we found interesting researching this for the podcast was the fact that they didn't shoot any of this film in Michigan.
No, they didn't. It was for budget reasons, apparently. But yeah.
The entire thing is suburban Los Angeles, and so we keep discussing here with different guests the kind of the degree to which that the choices that are made both by the production and by the director and so forth to shoot this film, to what degree it's this kind of fictionalized, imagined version of where Cusack and his production buddies came from,
Yeah.
and also to what degree it actually does succeed in convincing you of its artificial Midwestern sort of thing. Because I mean, America, Rayna, America is a place incredibly well. Unlike me, I've only been to 2 places in America. And Dev, how I know you've lived in America twice, but how much of America do you know?
I've traveled around a fair amount of America since I moved here. I ended up mostly vacationing around the US. So I've done the Western Seaboard. I've been to a few places in the Midwest, including Chicago and Indianapolis, and I've done an amount of the East Coast, but mostly the greater New York area, Connecticut, New Jersey kind of area. But
so you guys are way more informed than I am in terms of to what degree this film visually succeeds in faking its reality the way any good movie has to do, and to what degree it is just looking like it's Los Angeles, whether they like it or not.
I mean, yeah, that's a really good point. I think right at the beginning of the movie when he's in the big city, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the buildings we see in the background might be one of the same buildings that is used in True Lies.
Yes,
as a set.
I mean, it's very definitely that LA skyline that we're seeing there. And actually, it's interesting because at no point watching this before or after I moved to the US did it ever really cause me to suspend my disbelief.
No,
Ah,
and I think that's a really important point. I think what we have here is an iconic use of spaces.
Yeah.
So the Ultimart could be a 7-Eleven. It could be any kind of convenience store. Um, we could be in Clerks.
yeah,
Yeah.
It's great. I think also you've got that lovely sense of a high school could be a high school, could be a high school anywhere, right?
Yeah.
because it's the set that everybody
Mhm.
uses for high schools. I mean, this has
Yeah.
been. We were looking
Yeah.
at where this location was, and it was in Buffy all
hmm
those years while this is being done. But then it's also been in
Yeah.
like a billion other things, and it's still being used.
Still being used. Yeah. So you get that sense of this being an iconic set rather than, or an iconic set of sets and
Yeah.
locations,
Yeah.
rather than necessarily being something that is intended to give a real sense of place.
Yeah.
And I don't mind that.
Yeah.
I think this is a genre movie that is mashing together different genres, and it is doing so in a way that needs to make its points about place really quickly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And in making those points quickly, it needs to have that sense of universality to it.
Mhm.
So I don't mind that it's not Michigan.
No, and I think, the location, I mean, the fact that it's set in Michigan is very important, I think, to a lot of the
Mm,
points about like that social
yeah.
divide and the
hmm
time
To
and
the Detroitness of it all. Yeah.
exactly. But beyond that, especially those early scenes, like, I mean, I know Hugh and I were often confused as to where particular scenes were happening, right? Because he's in LA, then he's in Miami,
hmm
and like it wasn't necessarily clear, but it also didn't really matter or need to be. And you don't at any
Yeah.
point watching the film think about it until you start dissecting it 1 minute at a time, and then all of a
Mm.
sudden you're starting to try and
Suddenly,
figure out where
hang on.
everything is shot, and you're like, oh yeah, this is very LA, but it's not even. I mean, they did an excellent job of, once they're
Yeah.
meant to be in Michigan, selecting locations
Yeah.
that weren't iconically LA. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like they haven't been used in other films, because every street in LA has been used in God knows how many films at this point.
Well, this is what gets it. This is what's interesting about this time period as well, though, because in this time period, you have people starting to use parts of LA that weren't in use. So famously, there's an alleyway in Training Day that Antoine Fuqua had directed some rap videos in, but it was so dangerous in that part of Los Angeles that nobody else wanted to film there except a black director like Fuqua, because you would turn up there with the crew and stuff starts getting stolen and getting vanished and people start getting threatened. And so he used that in Training Day. But then you fast forward 6 years and it's in it's used in several episodes of 24, and then you fast
hmm
forward another 5 years and this is just like standard location and it's perfectly safe for everyone, and it's not been
Yeah.
gentrified yet, but it's interesting to see how you suddenly move away from, because I remember going to see John Borman's Point Blank at a revival print at BFI in London, and with him in attendance afterwards, and I'd forgotten that for most people, when that film first aired, it was the first time they felt the notion of Los Angeles as a setting for crime films, particularly from the noir era. Sorry, this was the first time it was done in color. And there's certain shots and certain angles,
Okay.
including the one here where they're out and having that conversation in the skyline. That's the first time it happens on film in color in that way, and then it becomes iconic, and then we see it
hmm
forever afterwards. The rest
Yeah.
of the 60s and 70s, it's always being used. And it's really hard for us whenever we as go back and look at these films, it's such an effort of mental will to step back for a moment to the audience of the time. At least here, all three of us saw this film pretty close to its original debut, either in the
hmm
cinema or on VHS, and that allows us to have that experience. We can talk with that authority now, and I do feel like we here we are in the diner, and diners are an iconic American establishments that now are globally known. You can now go almost anywhere in the world and find. I mean, Kim and I went to Copenhagen for Christmas, and they have a diner that, like, a proper American style diner, and it was terrific as well. I should point out the food was amazing. But being Danish, they could not let you have a big American breakfast without putting some vegetables on it, which was really funny. I got like a bacon sandwich and there was like all these little bits of cress on it, and I was like, okay, we're in Denmark. But but when the film came out, I don't think you could have found the equivalent of an American diner in
hmm
England for Love Nor Money
Mm.
in
I mean,
'97. I mean, we
it's
barely had
hard to know.
Starbucks by then, if
Yeah.
memory
I
serves.
think with this particular diner as well, there's something in the aesthetic of it, the kind of plain brickwork,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah.
that sense of almost like Formica top tables.
Mm-hmm.
there's something about it where, like I was saying before, it feels like every diner you might have ever been in, except they use it in a really unusual way.
Okay.
So you've got the back and forth, you've got the shot reverse shots going on, but then you have those moments where the waitress comes in and looms over the two of them. And I think those are really fun moments as well, because she is the least threatening presence in that room. And yet she is given that kind of gigantic looming status in the cinematography. I also love the way both of them, throughout their conversation and for reasons passing understanding, start to lean on the brick wall. And it starts with Dan Aykroyd doing it. And, so Grocer is kind of like they're both holding their guns under the table or on top of the table. But they both start to lean increasingly towards the wall, to the point where Dan Aykroyd's leaning his head against it at one point.
Yeah.
And then John Cusack starts to do the same thing. So they're mirroring each other in their performances in this weird improv, joyous kind of way. And it's just so much fun to watch them get into the scenery, like literally physically interacting with the scenery around them.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that was scripted or planned.
Yeah.
I get the definite sense that is improv in action, and I'm aware they kind of filmed 3 different versions of this movie. There was the kind of slightly toned down version, the exaggerated version that they use most of, and the improv version that went back and forth between the two. And I think this is one of those sequences where you're like, the more you watch it, the more you're like, what? Why?
Yes.
Why is this happening? And I kind of love the fact that I've never seen. Oh, sorry, I'm waving my hands in the cat.
Don't worry, it's fine. No worries. Hey, Kiki.
I love that Kiki is so into movies already that she's desperate to be part of this conversation. But yes, the way they get into the scenery here and use every single bit of prop around them, every aspect of the scenery is so great. And yet when you look at it again, there's not a lot of a sense of place there. It's all about the two of them and their interactions, right?
Yeah, the wide angle shots in this, there were a couple, but really not until the end and them breaking apart. But we've got the exact same trick that we were seeing in the Hippo Club, with the more that the two are engaged with each other, the closer the camera gets in on each of them.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the genius of the director. I think he understood by this point, having to cut down 4 hours worth of material. I think he's found a rhythm for these dialogue scenes. And as you say, Dev, it's pushing in a little bit closer with each assembly and a little bit closer until and as you say, Rayna, the actual actors themselves somehow on set were doing that as well, by physically, because they were already mimicking each other. The little dance of death they do outside LA, it's very Sergio Leone,
Yes,
but in a parody way, almost like a quick step version. And here it's that same thing of they've got no cover, and they're both people who want their backs to the wall, because there's a thing that Martin says about that at one point. And of course,
in the Hippo Club,
right. And we saw him do it in the radio station when he gets up and swaps chairs with her so that he has his back away from and he doesn't want to be back to them. That's what these two are doing. These two this is where you suddenly realize they don't want to be in this open environment whatsoever. This is not their norm. This is not normal for them at all. It's normal for everyone else in that room except them. They are the least normal thing in the room. But as you say, the film is designed in such a way, and brilliantly so, I think, that everything else looks abnormal. Everything else is larger than them, bigger than them. I mean, this is also the most like regular Joe costume we've seen on Blank. It's a black t-shirt, it's a brown wind cheater and his baseball cap. He basically looks like a mirror image of Grocer now.
Right? And I love that he draws attention to that in their conversation as well.
Yes.
Yeah. In the next minute, for sure.
Yeah. But in this minute, we get Grocer being the Grocer we know and love, and Aykroyd's little... the whole thing of the little conspiracy theory bits that just drop in now and then, he's like, what are those? And in the last minute he says, what are those? And Blank's like, oh, I'm taking nutrients. And then
this is so,
I love it. And Grocer pulls out his one and says, this is what you want, the new one, Dexedro 52 or whatever. And that's when as this minute begins, there, Martin's basically saying, hey, I don't do stuff like that anymore. and Gross is like, don't say do it. Right, when you don't do it, I take this because of my neurophysiologist prescribes it. Yeah.
And who has a neurophysiologist? Only in America, right? Yeah.
Well, not just that, but an assassin
Yeah.
has a
Yeah.
And
neurophysiologist.
I mean,
And of course there's that repeated motif throughout this film about the medicalization of the assassin's profession in
Yes.
correct.
various
Yeah.
ways.
And I
Yeah.
think how this is coming down from the military, right? This is
Yes.
about, not only is, the arms manufacturers are, like, heavily invested in the military, which I think we don't really see so much in this as we do in War Inc. But
Mm.
also, Pharma is getting directly involved with those sweet DoD contracts that are going to get
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
that stable
Yep.
income for however long. And peace bonds be damned, we're gonna try and figure out something to sell
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
US. Yeah.
And so when Grosser says, "Hey, don't worry, this stuff is legal. They'll be putting it in the water in 5 years." I love that line. That line is
Yeah.
like pure X-Files, pure conspiracy theory, and it's
Mhm.
literally they never come back to it. He
But it
says it,
comes from a
drops it.
very, like, sorry, as someone
No,
who's
go ahead.
growing up in America in the 80s, it comes from a very understandable place because
Yes,
you have those
exactly.
discussions about fluoride in the water for
Yep.
kids because it's better for kids,
Mm.
and that coming out of big pharma, but also out of, kind of experiments with military, staff and, so there is these jokes make so much sense from a
Yes.
place of like 1990s America where it's gone from everybody trusting the government to the Watergate scandals, and then nobody trusting
And then
anybody.
Iran
Yeah.
Contra, and then now we're
Mhm.
post Gulf War One, and we're
Yeah.
starting to see all the results of that. And these two are basically post Gulf War One veterans themselves, and so
Mhm.
they represent that generation, the promise of the '80s generation, gone there. You know,
And
Yeah.
but
we
then of
get
Oh,
course,
I read a really great review of this movie that makes that point so nicely. I can't remember where it's from. I think maybe Sight and Sound, actually,
mm,
where they were talking about how this is about how you have all that promise of the 80s and the rom-coms that John Cusack is in, early doors, and then all of a sudden he's back in that environment and is the most dangerous thing in it, just like you were saying, Hugh. But at the same time, it's about the failure of the promise of the baby boomer generation, and what Gen X has been left with as a result. So, you
yes,
know, all all of the careers everyone has carved out for themselves and the money they've made along the way are all about corporate America, or all about, you're a real estate agent who's trying to upsell, and you're a someone who's working in cars, and they're the most dangerous thing for the environment. But
mm,
it's all about the kind of loss of promise, and he
mm.
is kind of an emblematic sign of that,
Oh
is
yeah,
Martin Blank,
yeah.
yeah,
hence the last name. Yeah.
yeah,
And
exactly. I mean, this is the dark flip side of and again, I think Dev, you've mentioned this in a couple of other episodes. This is the dark flip side of reality bites and
Mhm.
all the Gen X comedies. You mentioned
Mhm.
Clerks earlier, Rayna, and of course that is. I feel like that may be a semi-deliberate thing that they did in the way
Yeah.
that they designed the Ultimate sequence, because we know from the scripts and from various interviews, they wrote 7-Eleven down, and 7-Eleven clearly, obviously, did not want to be involved. And you can see why. But the whole notion of the way the Clark himself is a little character, because in the fourth
Yes.
draft script he gets killed,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
But Pooh Bell shoots him, right, just so that he has no witnesses to what then happens in the Ultimate, right? So there's none of this thing of Martin saving him at the end, and actually. Not only do I prefer it the way it is, but that's why I feel like it's a conscious nod
Yeah. And
to
then
Clark.
and then you have right after that, right? Like, as he's getting up from the lawn, he's like, I'm hurt and I've got to find a new job. I've got to
Yes.
find a new
Yeah.
job, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the overriding thing for everyone at this point, right? And that's part of why it's in Detroit, because
Yeah.
that's the undercurrent of Detroit most explicitly, but it's also kind of the
Mhm.
undercurrent in New York and in LA and in the rest of America at this time, that
Mm,
there's this massively rampantly growing wealth divide, and
mm,
people are
mm.
really
And
feeling it.
what could be more mercenary than a job being an assassin. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, that's the thing,
Exactly.
isn't it? That's what I mean, Rayna, you would have loved the episode we did earlier where we were talking about the conversation he has with the renter-cop on the
Yes,
estate.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's just that moment without even saying what he does, he just says, professional talk.
yeah,
Are you allowed to kill someone? Just
yeah.
like, the way the cop doesn't, being a former school friend, doesn't even question what Martin actually does for a living.
Oh,
He just
and
goes,
hence,
yeah,
hence,
huh,
yeah. Whenever anyone else is talking to him about his job, and we'll come to this in a minute, I'm sure. Literally in a couple of minutes, we get that rehearsal of assassins being a normal job choice,
yeah, yeah.
and every time he tries to tell people what he does, they just kind of it's they assume it's a joke,
Mm.
but also it's funny because it's not quite out of the realms of possibility. It's funny because it's such a kind of everyday possibility.
Yeah.
You know, in a country, and I love my country, it's my home country, but in a country where gun violence is so everyday, different manifestations of gun violence don't surprise people in the way that they might. And so the extremes of gun violence, being an assassin, you know, it's a funny possibility.
Mm.
And you might joke about it. I'm so sorry, Kitten is
It's
just
okay.
being
Don't worry.
insane.
It's all good. It's all good. It's all good.
She just loves both of you so much.
Hey. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, that's very much at the heart of it. And in that context of commercialization and all these other things, I want to come back to the diner for one moment, just because
Oh
I
yeah,
felt the dialogue is interesting for me.
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah,
You have.
I was gonna say actually that like it's interesting that you often get a slight fourth wall break
Hmm.
from Dan Aykroyd's character Grocer in particular, right? He's the one that often, I mean, for a start, anytime he talks, he's just throwing pop culture references in thick and
Yeah.
fast. You know, putting stuff in the water, the Basque Whacker, the junk
Hmm.
bond. Well, actually, Martin
Yes.
cites the
Yeah.
junk bond stuff, which is
Mm,
straight out of the 80s, right? That was the
Hmm.
make it rain kind of
mm,
attitude
Yeah.
that everybody thought they were going to be living into and didn't
mm,
happen because, of
mm,
course, you know, that all collapsed. But it's these moments when these two are conversing that we really see the political sentiments behind this film, and it's
Oh yeah.
done somewhat overtly, but still it feels subtle because it's thrown in such a small portion of the movie, so thick and fast that you don't
mm,
feel it every moment in the way I feel you kind of are subjected to in like War Inc., where it's the same kind of sentiment but a little
Hmm.
bit more overtly expressed.
yeah. And I mean, coming back to the other thing, which is of course the point of the scene at this point in the film, what we're getting also is some additional backstory. Something that's been referred to time and again so far is the incident in the Northwest, the thing that Martin has screwed up. And one of the things I like about this is the idea that when Martin actually remembers the correct
Hmm.
name for the pet in question, unlike
Yes.
everyone else, no one seems to get it right. Secondly, is the bit where he's looking remorsefully down and goes, Boudreaux is never a target. Boudreaux was acting on instinct. And I
Yeah.
love the way he kind of paints, you suddenly get a totally different picture of what
Hmm.
everyone else has made it sound like Martin was an unprofessional, bad planning, didn't do his job as an assassin properly because he took out collateral. And the reality is that he understands what went wrong.
Yeah.
In the same way that in Miami, the kill went wrong and he couldn't do anything about that. That was just.
But I love the way it plays with the tropes of the assassin movie in
Mm,
these moments.
mm, mm,
So of course, if you were planning an assassination of three people hunting, you would look to the dynamite as a possible choice of a way of getting rid of them.
mm,
And of course, we have that lovely moment with the dripping poison,
mm,
and everything should be perfect. He's planned it perfectly.
mm.
It's reality that keeps intruding into his world it's reality, the things that really happen to us in everyday life, like a beloved dog getting in the mix, or
Yes.
somebody snoring or shifting in their sleep
Yeah.
and messing up the perfectly laid plans.
Yeah.
These are the sources of comedy for him.
And
Yeah.
He is a perfect assassin in an imperfect world.
I'd
Oh, I
never
like that.
once I'd never
Good
once
line.
consciously realized this, but There are 4 assassinations that we know about in this film, and not one of them does he pull off
They
flawlessly.
never go right.
Every
Yeah.
single one of them has some aspect of it go wrong.
Oh,
Absolutely.
that's
And
so
that's why
Marx
we love
Brothers.
this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Meals on Wheels. It's the classic,
yeah.
Sorry to bring in Asian
Hong Kong.
references.
No, but it is.
Yeah.
Ken Spelling
It's the perfect thing going wrong in an imperfect world. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I love the two of them together so much. Whenever Grosser gets in a space with Blank, you can see them kind of bouncing off each other as people desperate for someone who understands how hard their job is and how prone it is to going wrong.
Yes.
And I think that's why we get this lovely back and forth about medication.
In
this moment.
Yeah.
So, you've got the shakes, or, you should try my guy. My guy's got the good stuff,
I mean,
it's great to see people who are in this professional situation that normally never gets talked about, getting this possibility, this opportunity to talk about how difficult it is to be in this space and what they do to make ends meet, literally and figuratively, but also to deal with the stresses of the job, which never goes right.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. It's one of the things I love about the acting from throughout the entire film. Is this is the point where yet again Cusack brings the humanity to a very inhuman character. I would never hurt an animal. I'm offended at the accusation. Like, this is literally, they're making the American trope of "don't kill the dog" into a thing.
But it's the refrain we get the whole of the John Wick franchise from.
Yes!
Of course it is. It's, it's brilliantly prescient in this way.
Yes. Yeah, this definitely looks forward to John Wick in so many ways that I don't think I've ever seen any of the guys involved with John Wick mention, like Chad Stahelski and all the rest of them. And
I doubt they would, because they treat this situations in John Wick so humorlessly in so many ways. There is a kind of a humorous nod to, of course, that whole franchise is built on the death of a dog. But here we have almost an inverse of that idea.
Yeah.
And I love that, Blank is so frustrated by the fact that he would never go there.
Yeah.
And yet everybody assumes he would.
Yeah.
And he did.
So there's two aspects of humor that I do think that the John Wick films have, which I think you can directly relate to this film.
Mm-hmm.
And one is that in the first film, as things start to happen following the death of the dog, you see how embedded in the establishment everything is, because the cop who turns up at his door does not blink an eye. He just goes, "Evening, Mr. Wick. Had a complaint from down the road." And he says, "Everything okay?" And he goes, yeah. And then the cop looks over and he can see the bodies in the room. And he goes, "Are you working again?" And then the other thing is, when you fast forward a bit, I think it's John Wick 3, where one of the killers sent after him is played by the absolutely wonderful Mark Dacascos, Hawaiian actor, professional martial artist, Iron Chef. And he finally gets a moment of quiet where he's sitting at the other end of a bench from John Wick after they've been chasing each other down, and they've got a moment of quiet before anything kicks off. And he just turns around to him, and this feels very Grosse Pointe Blank, and he just goes, "I'm a big fan." That job you did. And I remember just cracking up, because that was so much like these two guys. That job you did, it was so, well done. As you say, people trying to desperately connect to somebody who understands their life. And I think you're right. I think Wick does take it all way more seriously than this film, but I also think they've just peppered a few nods in, and I would love to know if they like this film. I bet they do. I have a feeling every time I talk to people, and it's not just on this. This is one of the reasons this podcast has been enjoyed. Is everyone we talk to who has seen this film loves it.
Yeah,
you either love it or you don't know about it. Really, it's kind of the thing. I don't meet anybody who's watched it and is kind of half-hearted. This was minute 61 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, featuring your co-hosts, co-writers, and co-producers, Dev Soligar and Hugh David.
Today's guest was Rayna Denison. Where can we find you, Rayna?
I'm at the University of Bristol, and I am very easy to find through the university website.
Wonderful.
Fantastic.
You can find us at all good podcast players, as well as on YouTube, Twitter, aka X, and Spotify at Debi Radio, and on our website, debiradio.com. And for all of those, it is DEBI Radio.
And you can talk with us at the Facebook listeners group. Once more, Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club. That is once again DEBI Radio.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't a moment, it was a feeling.